Welcome to this episode where I have Deanne Vincent, the multi-talented woman that I have had a pleasure to work with and to start to get to know. And I'm so excited to be able to hear more of your story and more of the awakening moments, the impactful moments that have set you on your journey to where you're now living more consciously awake. So welcome, Deanne. So happy to have you here.
Oh my gosh, me too. It's so nice to have this conversation.
Yes. It's so interesting when you do most of your communication through, we've had a lot of emails and a lot of voice notes.
Yeah.
Deanne is do you call yourself a business coach? What is your title?
I dabble with different names, but like business coach, business manager, stuff like that.
It's lifesaver, all of Yeah, you have been helping me with a lot of my back end, a lot of the strategy behind the vision, and just it's been such a beautiful experience to have you as the backboard in a business that's a business of one, right? Having somebody else to help guide you it's been so cool.
Yeah. I'm so glad. It's been, oh my God, such an honor to work with you in this capacity, just because of how much I believe in the work you do. And I get how hard it is sometimes when it's just one person. You can go back and forth in your head. You're not the only one who it's helpful for. So I'm happy to provide that for you.
Yeah. And a lot of your clients are in this space, right? In more of the coaching or helping people in some capacity.
Yeah. So a lot of the people that I work with are online, usually surface-based female entrepreneurs who are really good at what they do and are like genius in all that they do, but sometimes struggle when it comes to actually building it or what it looks like in terms of an online business. So I kind of bring some of the masculine support or some of the structure and systems in place, but still being mindful of who they are as a human being with emotions and energies and melding the two so that they can show up fully. So it's fun. I really like it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because as somebody who has always been more in the masculine in my jobs, or just more like type A, organized, getting stuff done, taking on the bite or the plate rather of an entire business is like very humbling in the amount of work it is and the amount of support that you actually need to do all of the things, right? You normally in a job, you have one role in your one department and you help the bigger wheel move with your one cog. And there's just not enough hours in the day to be all the cogs in the wheel.
Well, you said it perfectly. It's like you said bite first, and then you realized, no, it's actually like the whole plate / the whole meal and the whole table when it comes to your business. And it's so much to consider, right? And I think sometimes you get into the work, a lot of people that I work with, it's like they really like what they do and believe in the work that they do, but they don't realize all that goes in behind the scenes in a business, which unfortunately is something that holds a lot of people back, or it means they burn out or they can't do it. And I think I just wish that more people who are so good at what they can do can show up in the capacity, and how can we support them to do that so that they can carry the table and offer other people to come and sit at the table with them when it comes to it.
Yeah, it's a Thanksgiving meal for sure.
With extended family, with in-laws, the whole shebang. Yeah.
What I appreciate too about your approach is, I've worked with some business coaches in the past where it's been sort of, this is what you do, this is how you do it, this is like execute. And sometimes for my brain, that's feels more safe, right? To just do something that someone's telling me to do. But you've challenged me many times to stop and like, how does that feel in your body? If there were no rules, what aligns with your values? And I think you have a really good balance of the feminine and the masculine in even more of a masculine role that you have.
Yeah. I think I understand the impulse to wish that there was a playbook that you could follow and be like, oh, this is exactly how I build this six-figure business. And it's so easy to get drawn in by that allure, but more and more, and this is like my fundamental philosophy, is like the best way to run your business is the way that you are meant to run your business.
Yeah.
And it's by showing up as more of you, not less of you. And it means that there's no rule book. And that can be so hard, but I just,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it can be challenging when you come up with different ideas for it, but at the same time, it's really fun, right? Because you didn't get into this business to then feel stuck in it or trapped or feel like you have to show up a certain way and be that cog in the wheel, right? So I really fundamentally believe like the more that you can show up as you empowers other people to do the same, and you are building a world that stands for everyone to show up free and empowered exactly who they are, not to think that they have to be anyone other than who they are in order to be successful. So it's so much fun. And it's so, yeah, I get that it's hard, and I get that I don't always give you the answers for things, but I think it's so important for people to check in, like, how does this actually feel with my body? With anything I say, for you to check in, yes or no, or is this expansive or constrictive? It's hard, but that's where the real work lies.
The amount of times where I've had to like had that full stop moment after reading an email or listening to your message, and it was just like, damn it, I have to check in with myself, and like, I have the answer, Deanne doesn't have the answer.
No.
Yeah, it's better, and it pushes all the edges for sure. Yeah.
Not as sexy when it comes to like a marketing approach to say like, I don't have the answers and it's on you. I will help reveal the answers so that we can make this work for you. But it is not necessarily, is an honest approach to how this works, which isn't always what people want to hear. So but for the people who are ready, like yourself, who are taking responsibility and are ready to step into that fuller power and fuller position in terms of choosing what they want to live for, it's magical. So
it is one little bite of the meal at a time.
One little morsel at a time. Yes.
How did you get into this type of work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I originally started way back when, more in the health and fitness world. So I was in physio clinics, I was a fitness instructor, and realized ultimately, trading hours for dollars, it was exhausting for my body, just wasn't necessarily sustainable. So I started looking into how I could do this stuff remotely at the time. This was way back in like 2014, 2015, like before everyone was Zooming, before the pandemic. So so I started looking into doing it for myself. And that's how I kind of learned the hard way to build this stuff. And then I started, like, there was other practitioners and other fitness people who started coming to me like, how did you do this? And so that's how it organically evolved into me now working with people for them to do their gift in this world. So
the pioneer of the virtual land.
I don't know if I was an OG in the online world, but I do feel like I was Zooming before it was cool, kind of thing. So
which back then it was kind of like nobody understood how you could make that work in the ways that everybody is doing it. Well, not a lot of people are doing it now.
I think in general, a lot more people are open to the online world just because we were forced to when everyone, was isolating in their homes for a while there. So it's kind of nice. It means that it's opened up a lot in terms of the online business. And it's kind of nice that I was an early adopter in terms of some of these ideas. So it's interesting. I'm excited to see where the future goes with what's possible, for sure.
Yeah. And to see your transition from, like you said, the hours for dollars to working with clients that are still aligned, it sounds like, in a lot of the values that you hold, and helping them grow and see kind of like your work be able to spread really far, really wide.
That's the thing, like all the people that I work with now, it's just brings me such delight and such, like, it just feels like I'm privileged truly to work with the people that I do now. And I think if I can help them help so many more people, like the ripple effect that it can have is so much greater than, frankly, that I was having. It wasn't necessarily my calling in that way. And so it felt like a natural evolution to help more people in a way that came, frankly, easy to me, this stuff. So it was,
That was one of the zingers that you, one of the many zingers that I've received from you, but it was like the what comes easy to you doesn't come easy to everybody. And like, how can you really stand for what that is and not undervalue what comes easy to you? Cause we're like, well, that's not that big of a deal. Like,
everyone can do this. Like you can kind of just figure it out. Right. And you kind of realize that the gifts you have, not everyone has, is tough. Well,
you're in the right place. Sounds like your journey has led you professionally here for a lot of the right reasons. Let's dive into a little bit more of the personal aspect, since a big part of my audience is in toxic relationships, recovering from toxic relationships. And when we started chatting about the work, you had shared that you had had some experience too.
Yeah.
So give us kind of a general overview of either before that started and what led to that, or whatever you feel is important information.
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton there. I won't,
of course,
our whole story in terms of the nuances, and we can dive more into it. But I think just as an overview, yeah, it was funny. I, kind of sheepishly, as we were reviewing some stuff for you, being like, well, maybe you could say it this way. Because that when I was in the toxic relationship, like I wouldn't really have wanted to hear outright that this was a dynamic, blah, blah, blah. Right. Because I wasn't ready to hear that at that point. Now looking back is very different. But I was originally, as a snapshot, my first boyfriend and I were together for 5 years. So that was like, early 20s to late 20s. I can't remember the exact age. And then when we split up, that was kind of like the point where I started to wake up to the realization that I wanted more. It was one of the hardest decisions I had made at the time, to leave that relationship. That was good, right? Like this could have been a very good, he was a good man, and I loved him so much and he loved me. But I just realized that there was a pull for more within myself. And so, leaving months later, it felt like everything's flowing, things are going great, like mourned and like grieved hard. But then when I started getting back into the dating world several months later, went on 2 first dates. The 3rd date fell hard for this guy. And that is the dynamic, I think, that changed a lot for me when we talk about the toxic one. And it's hard to label things, right? Like looking back, I can see certain unhealthy, absolutely dysfunctional patterns that we were engaged in. So it was several months that we dated, and then he broke up with me over text, kind of very out of the blue, classic kind of like avoidance strategies when shit was coming up in terms of his life. And then I cried once, even though I was like, this is the guy I was forever supposed to be with in my head. And a week or 2 weeks later, I got diagnosed with an ovarian cyst. So I had them before in my early 20s, changed my diet and kind of my whole lifestyle. But this was a different level in terms of energetics and much more emotional. Anyway, so they went through that. We picked up again and connected and did more like a friends with benefits thing. I had just read Eckhart Tolle and was like so in like the power of now and like that stage. And it truly was fun. And I'm really glad we did that. But then as I was nearing my surgery, I was like, I need more. Like I said, no. And he recognized that anyways. And then we got back together in a relationship. He's like, I'm ready, to do this again. And that was in the winter then. And we tried again in terms of a relationship, but it was rough. And again, so then I was looking into freezing my eggs at the time because they had removed my ovarian cyst and my left ovary. And so at the time when they did that, they found a tumor, like a tumor in the area there my ovary used to be. And it was just uber stressful with him. So even before my next surgery, he broke up with me again. And then, so that was my lowest point, I think, when I was like, I have this tumor. I don't know if I have cancer. I don't know if they're going to remove everything when I'm going into this surgery. Like I could wake up with no uterus, no ovary, who knows? I'm single and I'm devastated. Like it was just a rock bottom, I think, in terms of my journey, which I am thankful for now. I had to kind of confront a lot of the shadows and the things I was running from at that point. It was kind of a wake up point in my journey. And then we on and off again, still kept in touch until a year later or so when it felt like I finally released him. So,
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, health journey in general is incredibly challenging. And when it's affecting the parts of you that make you a woman, right? And can affect your ability to have kids or, whatever sort of the goal is or was, I can't imagine the amount of turmoil that you must have been in that whole experience.
And it was hard, right? Like I challenged my very idea of what made me lovable at the time, right? Like it was my very feminine parts, it felt like were flawed at the time, right? Like that was the story that was going on in terms of the narrative, right? And whether it was conscious or not, it was kind of like, who would want me? But this very like at one end, and then the other end of the spectrum was like, but because I'm sick and I'm, really small at this moment, I need you, and you can't leave me, right? Yeah. So it's like this very polarizing dynamic where it's like, who wants to stay with me and how could you leave me, right? Yes. Which is not the healthiest for then me to engage in any partnership. So those are the dynamics that came through both the health struggles and the surgeries, and then the partnership at the same time.
I mean, to me, that makes total sense of if you have somebody, you're going to cling so hard to them, because if the idea of being single and never finding someone who will want you is so strong, like, of course you're going to gravitate towards the person that's already quote unquote yours, right? Or chose you.
Yeah, I thought like to go through this whole thing where someone else has to meet me. And I was still like, again, I was with my first boyfriend, loved him for 5 years. So I was so scared to then be vulnerable with someone else after going through these surgeries and having these scars on my stomach, was thinking like, oh dear God, like who's going to love me, right?
Yeah.
So it's scary to then, so of course, like I was so clingy when it came to that person, especially, right? And I thought he was the answer to all of my problems, right? Yeah. Until I had to go within myself to figure stuff out for myself.
It would be convenient if the person could just fix all the things. And just because of the fact that you are in a relationship and you have a partner, that therefore makes you feel confident and feel self-assured and, be able to stand independent of the relationship. But that's not how it works all of the time. And especially if you haven't done more of an internal look.
Yeah, I thought him choosing me and being with someone made me worthy and like a woman, right? Yeah. And so if he didn't choose me, especially the rejection, right? Like him literally leaving me, then felt like him wanting me made me wantable, when I didn't disconnect the two. It was like, I am worthy all on my own, with or without someone else wanting me. But at the time I thought I gave him the power in terms of like deeming whether I was worthy or not. Yeah. Which is such a roller coaster, right? Like then it means I gave him all the power, and I meant I was riding this highs and lows, whether he was reaching out to me or not reaching out to me. And it was pretty awful.
That is the cruel irony of that dance, because, and I can relate to that in my past toxic relationship too, where it was like, we want to be in control. And as women who do have more masculine tendencies, like we like control for whatever reason. And when we give our entire sense of self and our entire worthiness to a man, we are completely out of control. Yeah. Oh and it's God. A matter of, do they like me today? Do they not like me today? Are they manipulating me today? Are they pulling me in? Are they pushing me away? Like, and you're just at the whim of this other person and all of their shit. Yeah. And who knows even what their internal dialogue or stories are at that point, right? But I thought in terms of like the masculine wanting to control things, right? It's like, I thought if I could be, healed enough, or if I could be perfectly steady, and if I could be high vibe, and if I could have everything of my shit and all my eggs in a basket, then he won't leave me, like he will stay. It's all my responsibility, without realizing it is that dance. Like it takes two people to figure out their own stuff to be together. And so I fell into this very like insidious thought pattern that I think sometimes personal development can do, thinking it's all on us to have it all perfectly figured out. And it's this idea that then we can control the outcome. And of course, grow and learn and evolve, but also you're not God. I couldn't control him no matter how hard I tried. And also, in terms of a loving dynamic, I was really struggling. Like
was worried about whether I had cancer. I didn't know if I could have kids. I was going through the surgery again. A loving dynamic would have been someone supporting me, but in the meantime, I was the one trying to support him because he was freaking out about this insecurity. So it's just kind of funny to look back on, and I can kind of laugh about it now, but it's so hard when you're stuck in it and you want to control it so badly.
I think that impulse to do more, to learn more, to go to more therapy, to read more self-help books, to listen to all the podcasts. Like, I know in my experience, I was doing therapy for the both of us. Like half of my therapy sessions was me talking about what he needed to fix and how, if he could just see this, or how do I help him see this? And it's like, none of that was my fucking responsibility.
He has his own work to do, right? And we all do, in terms of, he has his side of the street and I have my side of the street. But it's just amazing how much mental bandwidth that women, I find, and I'm being stereotypical, often take on in a dynamic. They're the ones who are, seeking out therapy and learning books and stuff like that. In order to make something work. And that there's so many more things you can do with that mental bandwidth and that capacity that is going towards managing his emotions, and the emotional labor that goes into making the relationship work is, it's another pedestal or like a soapbox I can stand on to rant on about for women.
I mean, red flag number one, if you feel like everything in the relationship is your fault and therefore in your power to fix, and there's not an equal match of effort, like this is not a level partnership. This is you either stepping into mother role and trying to fix everything, or being manipulated on some level. It's not what partnership is supposed to feel like.
No. It's so hard. And I have such compassion when I think back now on myself. Like, when I think back to that version of Deanne, it was just like my little girl who I had surgeries when I was a kid, right? When I was under 2. So it was that stuff that was coming up in terms of my fear of abandonment. If I spoke up about those things and I'm in the hospital, like, I'm so vulnerable, they'll just leave me and I'll be left alone. So it was all those things that started playing out in terms of that dynamic. And so I just look back with so much like love in terms of that little Deanne who was just trying to make things work. And so I don't have any judgment when it comes to women getting stuck in these dynamics. Like, I get it so hard, and it's still there for me in terms of the pull for that sometimes, right? It's never ever like, oh, I have it magically cured. But just giving women so much grace, like when that small kid in us is just seeking love, and that's all it often comes down to. But it's so understandable that that's happening for us.
Yeah. And specifically in him coming back too, right? And probably professing his love or professing that he was going to be there for you. It was like that little girl that's like, oh, okay, like you're going to hold me. And of course you're going to go back to that, because that feels a lot less scary than being alone. If you don't have the tools, right, to be able to be alone.
No, I was so scared to be alone.
Yeah. What, in that sort of going back, were there other things that you felt were more manipulative on his side, or was it that scared little girl that was just seeking comfort?
It was, for sure. I mean, in terms of myself seeking comfort, but sometimes it would be when I was kind of hootless about things and, not really caring. That's when I felt a little bit more magnetic, I think, to him to some degree. But I think I've heard I was vulnerable, right? Like, I was willing, kind of like a sheep, I would have followed him to slaughter, frankly. And so his responsibility in that time is recognizing he had a lot of the power. And so his manipulation, whether it was conscious or not, is knowing that he could give me a bare minimum or like the slightest thing, and I would jump on it, right? And so I don't necessarily know if it was conscious or not. I think, he enjoyed how I gave him the validation and kind of pumped him up, or, he didn't have to even do that much in order, for me to meet some of his needs and wants. But that, I think, is something that again, in a heteronormative relationship, often men need to take responsibility for is like, yes, women, it is your responsibility to not be so clingy and center yourself. But men or women, if you're recognizing that someone is so attached to you or willing to do anything for you, you have to really look and see, like, treat them almost like a kid. Like, are you taking advantage of them? And I think that can be often very hard because they are an adult and they all make adult choices. But can you honestly be at peace knowing how you're acting and what they're willing to do? There is a certain power dynamic that's happening. And so that, I think, is something that I wish she would have taken responsibility for, even though it's not what I would have wanted, because then it meant he wouldn't engage with me. But I think that was the like manipulation part, whether it was conscious or not on his end.
Yeah. I love that analogy of the sheep following to slaughter, right? Like, and the common experience that all of the women I work with have, that I have, that sounds like you have, is this like unsense of self, like to the point where you can't cultivate the confidence from within. You don't know what you stand for. You don't know what you need. You don't know how to express that. You don't know how to not walk on eggshells, right? We're used to being rescuers or people pleasers or bend over backwards or, whatever it looks like. And so
to make it work. Yeah.
And we get really good at fitting in with somebody else.
Yeah.
And so to shift from relationships where you're dependent on a man to give you your validation and your worthiness, you have to spend some time cultivating your internal validation and your worthiness.
Yeah.
And that's not what we're taught to do.
No. And this is where, like, yes, it's on individuals, but also like to take a step back and sometimes see the brain bath that we're in terms of society that we live in. We are raised as females, typically, that your sole purpose in life is to typically find a man, live happily ever after, be that domestic support for him and children, and don't ever put your own needs or desires or dreams first. Your whole worthiness is whether you can be chosen as a man. And so from the very beginning, in terms of infancy, when people and women are being raised, we're taught to abandon ourselves in order to gain the love, which isn't true love, but that companionship and that partner, which drives me bonkers.
We're not that far removed from our grandmothers, right? Who had to, in many ways, and maybe more great grandmother, but starting to change, but they had to find a man to survive because they didn't have their own jobs. They didn't make their own money, right? They were sort of just like led to the next man outside of, after the father that would take care of them and the family. Yeah. And so as millennials, like, we are kind of on the beginning train here of being able to make our own money and be independent and choose to not want to have kids until we're in our mid 30s or 40s, right? Like, that is insanity to what our grandmothers and great grandmothers had to do. Yeah. So shifting that, even ancestral trauma that we're given, all the beliefs that are passed down, like, it's like, how many layers of shit do we have to take off to like find ourselves? Yeah. I know. And it's not that long ago. Like you said, like, all the stories and the narratives that we're learning from our mothers and grandmothers is based on the fact that men were their survival. Like, without them, they wouldn't be able to survive and really be independent in this world. And it was since the 1970s that I think women couldn't even have a credit card in their name. Like, that's not that long ago. No. That we could literally finances is often security in today's day and age, right? But that we couldn't have that in terms of our independence. So of course it's really hard. So I think we're this generation that's now like sees the old ways and is forming this new way of relating. And you're starting to see how that's shifting in terms of dynamics of partnerships and parenting. And it's a beautiful thing, but it's like this uncomfortable metamorphosis that's happening at the same time too, right? Oh yeah. Ultimately, like, a lot of fundamental struggles come down to truth and love. Like, we think if we're in our truth and if we speak our truth, it sacrifices
love. It comes at the cost of belonging, right? But then if we only want to belong, then it comes at the cost of our truth.
Yep.
And so it's this constant teeter-totter that's happening often for women right now, that we think it has to be this either or situation. And that's something I think I hope to see in our lifetime change, where we know, not just want to believe, that you can both be in your truth and speak your truth and be loved at the same time. That true belonging is actually comes from your truth, and that your truth is actually what is the only thing that actually enables love to actually happen. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just like not even acceptance. What's the word? It's like approval. Love is not approval. And I think sometimes we get those things confused. Yeah. So we're kind of on this like edge of a precipice of things. And I really am excited to see how women and a lot of people I'm surrounding myself, I'm so fortunate with, who are leading in a new way themselves and partnerships.
Yeah. And when you take the time to question the beliefs that you were handed down and unpack some of those bags that were neatly packed for you, like you then disrupt that continuing transference. So you doing your work and creating your own self-identity and your own sense of what a woman is, then shows your daughter what's possible, right? And it's like now they get to go in a different trajectory than just continuing down the same road and never looking at anything, never unpacking anything, never question anything. Like you're not just doing your healing work for you, you're doing it for your daughters and everybody that you come in contact with. Like how much influence do you have in any woman who sees you standing up for yourself or sees you setting the boundary or saying the hard thing? Like, fuck yeah, that's empowering as shit.
Well, your liberation is a stand for everyone else's liberation around you. So as soon as the more you are liberated, the more other people are allowed to be liberated around you. And that can be the most uncomfortable thing. Because honestly, sometimes people, and I was the same way, like I wanted to believe that the stories of like, oh, if you just do this and this, then you'll end up being happy and you'll have the house with the picket fence and everything will work out. Yeah. But as soon as that kind of eroded at the end of that first relationship unraveling, when he broke up with me out of the blue, it felt like, I was like, well, oh my God, if that's not real, then what else? Like, what is real? Like there's not, when as soon as you start to question anything, you start to question everything. And I think a lot of people, it's scary. It's not easy to start, wondering and questioning about the rules that you take as the norm, right? And if that's not the norm, then you can kind of just live whatever way you want. What? Yeah. Like
what? There's no guide. There's no like
no guide,
no script. Like
no. And that I think is both the most liberating and expansive thing, but also simultaneously the most terrifying thing at the same time, right? It's the same thing with business when we talk about it. Is like, wait, I have to check in with myself and to do it my way. I can't just do this and then it'll, result in the result I want. It's the same thing, relationships. Like you can't just do X to get Y. It's the same thing with life. You can't just do X. And a lot of people that are doing it, right? Like they're getting the thing that they thought would give them what they were seeking, this feeling of okayness, this feeling of love, this feeling of success. And it's happening and the result isn't happening the way they predicted, which is causing these wonderful existential crises, which are hard, but I'm grateful for that people are waking up.
How, when you were in that back and forth with him and that like you would come back and you'd get that, warm rush of like, I'm wanted, I'm worthy, I'm needed, all the things. What made you did you leave for the last time? Did he leave for the last time? Like what was sort of the final, you were like enough?
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could tell you I had this like empowering girl moment in the movie where it was like, enough's enough. And I left. No, I was like still the toddler kicking and screaming, being like, but I want him still. And so, yeah, he broke up with me. Like, again, it's kind of this like teeter off that actually happened. It wasn't this like hard awakening moment. So he broke up with me before that last surgery. And that was our last like formal relationship. And then he reached out after the surgery And we kind of engaged back and forth. And then, yeah, so we were just kind of like, again, he was giving me breadcrumbs and I was accepting it. And I was, kind of open to dating other people at the time, but still just holding out hope that this would still happen, and still kind of believing that this is the person for me, which is bullshit, because he was not the person that was giving me and who I could be with. So it was kind of this painful back and forth with the pandemic. Again, things shifted where we would see each other once or twice, but then the last time I saw him was I was coming back from my cottage, and I remember I had messaged him the night before, and we kind of like hinted sexy about like getting together.
Yeah.
And then I was driving back, and he had a very distinct car, like an old convertible orange, so it was bright. And coming back, I remember the highway, and we passed literally like sign from the universe going the opposite direction, and he was in the car with another woman.
Oh.
And so I would like visceral reaction, like, gut drop, sweaty, but also so mad, like, how dare he? And so that was the last time I saw him. And we talked in terms of like, he owned up afterwards, like, yeah, it was a date and blah, blah, blah. And so, yeah, it was hard. And then I like wasn't really moving on. It was hard in terms of so then I think I rebounded the opposite direction in terms of the next relationship I was in, where it was someone who really, really wanted me in terms of the beginning and felt so safe for me. But to be honest now, and we've since broken up, is I didn't really want him as fully as I wish as much as I really wanted to and tried to. So then I didn't really let go of that toxic dynamic, because I couldn't write about it in my journal because I was afraid of him reading it. So it started to get this like very suppressed story. So I wasn't letting go until finally when we broke up and I was able to journal on it, then it felt like this release and no attachment at all whatsoever. Yeah. And so that was the clarity finally that came years later, but
yep,
it's okay.
It's interesting how we can swing from like the toxic, the clearly emotionally unavailable, avoidant bad boy, right? Yeah. Who's like pops back in when it's convenient for him, and like the sex is really hot, whatever. Like,
oh yeah,
swing from that to like intellectually, we're like, I want the stable man. I want the man who's not going to play games. I want the one who's going to show up. I want the one who loves me, who's going to show me respect and attention. And then we find that person. We're like, what is this? Like, I don't, either you're bored, or like the amount of love they want to give you is too intense, because you literally can't hold that because you don't have the love for yourself first.
No, it's so hard to receive that.
Yeah. But it can feel so frustrating because we can say like, I want these things. And then when we're presented with it, our capacity to hold it is zero, because part of the reason we're attracting the bad boy is because we are also emotionally unavailable to some level.
Yeah.
And
that's the hardest realization since that relationship ending, is how much, as much as I say I want that loving, open, expansive partnership, is actually looking in the mirror and seeing where is my emotional unavailability in terms of like my not willingness to be open or vulnerable or to give the love or receive the love. Is how much I was actually really closed off, and how in some ways safe I felt in the dynamic where he was running from me. Like there was a reason that I was super attracted to that, because if someone was just staying put and being like, here I am, I'm here to love you openly, I'm not holding anything back, I've realized since, I'm like, oh shit, like whoa, that's
too much.
Too much. And then I would run, right? And so I haven't actually engaged in that many dynamics since then, but I've had to really look at, since that relationship, the toxic back and forth, is how I'm emotionally unavailable, and working through that still in terms of the partnership that I'm in now. In terms of being met and meeting him, it's still unfolding and unraveling and opening, right?
that can feel like a very like bumpy ride, right? Where you're like, you're like starting to do your work, you have awareness that these are your tendencies to push people away or keep them at a distance, whether that's, you know, a physical distance, or you're dating married men, or you're you know, whatever the barrier is to keep them from getting too vulnerable, too close. Once you start identifying that and then practicing being vulnerable in a relationship, like the word vulnerability is thrown around a lot, right? And we're like, oh, I like to talk about my feelings with my friends or whatever. And like, we assume we're vulnerable. And then we get into a relationship and the opportunity, you know, presents itself to have a hard conversation. And it's like, are you going to step forward or are you going to run away?
We can intellectualize vulnerability and talk about vulnerability, but actually sitting in that white hot discomfort of a scary conversation is being invulnerable and being in that feeling. And it's two very different things. Is something that I think that we go into the head when it comes to vulnerability versus the actual body experience. Because it's so hard to sit in that feeling, right? We have every instinct that this is like alarm bells going off. I'm feeling unsafe. I need to retreat and protect myself. And I recognize like in different areas is like, okay, I'm really open. I feel safe being like physical, and like that's a safe way for like with sex, like that gives me affirmation. I know how to show up, or, you know, like, but then like crying during sex is like that intimacy in terms of making love versus sex are two different things. And so I've had to realize how I fall back on physical in a way that I think, you know, we're connected versus what actually connection is like when it comes to physical intimacy are two different things.
And I would assume your partner now is also very open and accepting of vulnerable conversations, and perhaps doing his own work around that. And that creates the safety to be able to explore. Because if you're trying to be vulnerable, but you're still attracting men who are playing you in some fashion, like you're going to get the repeated confirmation that you can't, because it's not safe.
And I think the biggest like awareness that I have in terms of the relationship I'm in now. And I never want to be like, and now I figured it out and now I have this relationship and it's perfect. And here's the like, you know, desired after place. Like, I'm not going to paint that picture for women necessarily. Like, I think that's a dangerous story to fall into marketing wise, or just in terms of life. But the difference in terms of the relationship I'm in now versus anyone other than I've had in the past is his willingness and his responsibility in doing his work to clean his stuff up. Before we met, he was divorced, he's sober, like he's gone through a lot of his own inner journey in terms of who he is today. But I also trust that, like, I just trust him to be able to hold himself, not perfectly, just like I can. And there's ebbs and flows and things, but his capacity is so much greater.
And he already intrinsically has the drive to continue to look at himself and do the work. I think that's, if that's a value of yours, and if you're listening to this podcast, likely is, right? Because you're on some sort of self-discovery journey, to have a partner who aligns in that value will make your life and your relationship so much more easeful. Because you're already on the same page, and you both understand what it is to take accountability, to take responsibility, and then to have these vulnerable conversations, to talk about what needs to be talked about, or to, you know, figure out what boundaries need to be set. All of the adult things that we're not taught, and often just shown the complete, you know, misdirection of where we're supposed to go and how to communicate, how to be in relationship, you know, all of that. But if he's already that man when you're meeting him, chances are you're moving in a direction that's going to, you know, suit both of you, instead of choosing somebody who, you know, says they're into self-work, but then you're like, you know, have you found a therapist? Are you doing the coaching? Are you, you know, and you're constantly, again, mothering, trying to get them to do it. It's like, we can't make people do anything.
No. And I think that was the hardest realization with people in the past, is I really wanted them in, and I think they wanted it. They just didn't do it. Right. And that is just the reality of it. Right. They can say they want to do something, but the reality was they weren't. And so now when I'm with this man and he is doing the work and practicing it, and I trust him in terms of his integrity and the foundation that he's set so deeply, like that relaxes my nervous system. It doesn't mean he's going to solve all my problems, right? But I know that he's taking care of his side of the street.
Yes.
And I think that that is one of the most important values to me, right? Just everything I've been through in the past in terms of my health struggles and relationships and just my wiring is I'm not really here to mess around in this lifetime. I want to open myself and to question things and to continually grow and explore and expand. And that value of growth is something I deeply desire in a partner.
Yeah.
And that's the same for him, is he recognizes like that was something that he really wants in a partner too, is like, can we grow together? It doesn't mean we're going to be this, we're going to be different people as we change and evolve, but that willingness and desire and responsibility to do the work and grow, like that's really hot to me. Yes. And that's something that not only is like super sexy and turns me on, but also is very safe too, right? And like I trust him. And when I can trust him, it means like my body as a feminine being relaxes, it opens, I can surrender to him in terms of my feelings and my bigness, be it tears during sex or just like being silly and dancing in the kitchen or things like that. Like that is just so wonderful. And I can, he holds me, but I have to hold myself too. It's both. But it's really fun to see it and have this experience.
I love that, what you just said about the body being able to relax and open, because there is an understanding that the hot, passionate sex, the fiery, like can't take your hands off of each other sex comes with toxic relationships. Yeah. And it's like, if you've never had secure sex, like you're in for something incredibly beautiful, because you will access parts of yourself and your capacity to feel pleasure when you feel safe.
Yeah.
Because even if you're unconsciously mistrusting of your partner, like we're holding that somewhere, right? And preventing full access to all the places where we can feel pleasure. And when you can surrender and trust that person with your life, right? Like you're literally opening your light, you're exposing the most vulnerable parts of yourself. Like that is the hot sex. That is the good sex. That's the sex you want.
But I recognize, like at first, in some ways, I really felt safer in the unsafe sex, where it was constricted and it was more performative and I didn't have to open and be vulnerable.
Right.
That was what my capacity was ready, like could handle at that point in terms of that toxic dynamic, super hot, but not really requiring more of me in terms of who I fully can be. And so now when it's in this dynamic where I can open and I can show more, like I can feel sometimes when I want to constrict and I want to like, oh God, I'm going to open, like it's going to be messy and it's going to be scary. And God, what made he think of me? But there's so much more depth and richness and connection and feeling and experience that comes not only for myself in terms of what I want to experience in this lifetime, but what can then happen between us too. Like what he can feel as doing it, how he grounds it. It's just this beautiful dance that then starts to happen. And it is getting more and more as we are evolving as people and getting to know each other and, forming this sacred relationship that we have.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important for, women who are in our positions with men who are that to speak more outwardly that those men exist. Yeah. Because I know in my experience too, I'm like, I had experience with one type of man, right, in different forms, but it's like, because I was emotionally unavailable, that's what I was attracting. That was my experience. Yeah. And I had no idea that this whole other world existed, I'm like, I wish I could just choose to be a lesbian, because at that point in my life, I was like, only women can be this way, because that was my frame of reference for a woman. And that's not, it's not true.
But we need to see evidence of that, not only so then I can say like, there is these men, and I can say this to my friends, like these men do exist, and they may be, you know, these rare breeds at this point. We don't, but they do exist. But I think the other thing we need to say is be public about this, because when I talk to my partner now, is he says it's hard to find other men like him. Like it's vulnerable for them to open up or have these conversations. And so he, you know, outing him so then he can find other men who are like this, right? And normalizing that for men to be like, he can be super masculine and driven and still like outwardly quote unquote normal, but inwardly he has this rich depth and expanse that he can hold. So it's like both, like we think it has to be this all or nothing, that then men shy away from doing the work because they'll turn into who knows what stereotypes they have. But I think I want women to know that these men exist, and I want men to know that these men exist, so that they can find other men, and so they can make it safe for other men to become these men. I think that is something I hope and I believe in seeing is going to be a huge revolution, is men doing their work. Because women are doing it, and we're kind of demanding that men step up. I saw this stat that more and more women are not getting married. Right. And that's, you know, there's a whole bunch of different factors and nuances that go into it. But I don't want to get married if it's, you know, locked in with someone who's, you know, not willing to change or grow. Right. But so we're saying like, I'm willing to stay unmarried instead of get married. And so men, if you want to be with me, you have to step up. And I think this is this like wonderful call that's going forth to men at this stage.
And it's not we're up here, we're pulling them up, right? It's like, I'm stepping up. If you want to join, this is where I'll be.
This is where I'm playing at here.
And just like we're trying to rewrite our grandmother's stories, right? They're rewriting their grandfather's stories. And that what's driven into them of being the masculine, being the provider, being, you know, their worthiness. Their worthiness coming from providing the money. And what happens when women start providing the money and shift all of that? So much compassion for both sides. But I believe in seeing my ability to start holding more of the masculine and the feminine, because I feel safe. When I felt unsafe, I was in masculine because I was in protection, right?
In control mode, secure, seeking security.
So more of this balance energy within myself. And John, my partner, also has a balanced energy. And it's like, yes, he's the man, but he has beautiful feminine qualities and ability to be sweet and genuine and giving, and, you know, all the things that we would classify as what the woman does. It's like we're both balanced. And so the relationship feels balanced. Which is it's a very cool experience to be able to like engage in life in that way. And
that's so beautiful. And I love that you recognize that balance within yourself. And then of course, then you would meet someone who also has that balance. Because I find what happens is if we're, you know, only in our masculine, then we're seeking, like, the balance happens with the partnership, right? So if we find that internal balance between us, we meet that person who has that same internal balance, and it can ebb and flow. And sometimes it's higher one way and the other way. And it's not like we're static beings, nor do we have to be. But I think it's safe for for women to be both that balance within themselves, to be nurturing, but also to be, you know, I have my own back. Too. And then for men to say, like, I can still be, you know, the masculine and sometimes a provider, like those stereotypes say, but also still be really loving and outwardly expressive in terms of emotion. Like, that's safe and okay too. That doesn't make me not a man. So having that balance for both men and women is so possible and so beautiful. And then it allows for the partnerships that are much more balanced. Everything opens up.
My partner and I's journey is a perfect representation of not being ready for each other. Like, I knew him 10 years ago we worked in a restaurant together, And he had a huge crush on me. And I was at that time in my life so focused on this one man who gave me the breadcrumbs, right?
Yeah.
It was like, he's emotionally unavailable, so I'm gonna stay over here.
I'm gonna go chase that.
And like wasn't attracted to John, was, you know, like apparently he asked me out and I was kind of like I'm busy tonight, or like said something very
like shrugged it off kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we got reconnected 10 years later from Hinge randomly.
Oh, okay.
And when we met for coffee the first time, I was like, how did I not pursue this back? Like, I mean, he's beautiful and he's like he's all the things that I said I wanted. And yet back then I couldn't see him literally at all.
Yeah.
And so it took 10 years of work and shifting and being able to balance within myself and feel worthy of a man who wanted to give love.
Yeah.
To be able to even feel like he was attractive.
Yeah.
It's wild.
But that's so beautiful. Did you know when you saw him and reconnected on Hinge that you knew him from before right away?
Yeah, I recognized him. And we hadn't really talked throughout the 10 years.
Yeah.
And we were minimal friends even during the time of working together. So I recognized him and I was like, oh, you're a safe person. I know you. Let's go for coffee. Right. Like, and then in the interaction on our first date it more came back to me and we got to riff on what it was like to work at the place. And it was so easy from the beginning to communicate, which was something that was severely lacking in all my relationships, but definitely the previous one, where I was like, wow, we can just sit and like literally talk for hours. Like it wasn't hard. It wasn't like, any of the things that I was maybe expecting it to be. And then we ended up just going really slow into being intentional about learning about each other before the physical came a part of it, because we both were conscious that was an old pattern. So it just unfolded in a way that let us feel really safe with each other.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. Like, I think, so many women were like, oh, how am I going to meet this guy? Like, you just have literally no idea. And then you share this story and you're like, you had met him before, right? You didn't really meet him because you were different. You were the same person and same soul, but you were a different person. And so like how you meeting 10 years ago is different than you meeting 10 years later because of how things change. So you just have no idea of how things can unfold. Yeah. But all that you can do is keep, I don't know, just unraveling the things that, the Rumi quote is, our task is not to seek love, but to remove the barriers to it or something like that. Like that's all we have to do is remove everything that's in the way of us being able to experience it, because it's there. It's not really a work that needs to be done. It's more of an undoing and an unraveling that needs to happen. Yeah. Which is, I love the story of you meeting John, re-meeting John based on that.
Yeah. When someone's thinking about starting to do this work, right? Maybe they're in the position of they just left for the last time. They know they want it to be the last time. They know they want to start balancing themselves, understanding themselves. Like what piece of advice would you have for them in that transition time?
I mean, the first thing, and what I think all women generally need to do is give themselves more grace. I think sometimes we seek this work feeling like we need to change, or as though something's wrong with us. And all I want to give is like the biggest hug to all these women. Like there's nothing wrong with you and it's a-okay. And really it's much less about doing than you think it is. Yeah. And then my piece of homework, if they feel so called to do it, is to write a letter. Like if you were to just pause and sit down with yourself and you open a journal and you have your piece of paper and you write a letter to like that part of you that's seeking the love. So be it like, for me, it would have been like my little inner child, like my little girl, and that part that was so seeking this other person. And just don't overthink it. Like there's nothing you have to like do or achieve by writing this letter, but literally just writing a love letter to that part within you that is seeking something outside of itself, and starting to form a relationship with her or it, or that like clinging or needing part. And even having maybe a love letter within your journal, or a dialogue back and forth between like my adult self and my, little child, or my higher self and my small self, whatever it may be, if it's a conversation that feels more natural, but just befriending and loving yourself.
Yeah.
Every step along the way.
There's a quote by someone I'm blanking right now, but it's like, healing is touching the parts of us that we previously feared, touching it with love or something. I'm butchering it, but the same principle of like, when we can turn and look at and hold that scared little girl and not meet her with, oh, why are you doing this again? And why are you attracting the same person? And what's wrong with you? And you're fucked up, and you're 30, 40, 50 years old, and you should have this figured out by now.
Like, we have to fix this. We have to solve this problem. Like, we have to change, basically. Like, anytime, imagine if someone came to you and was like, oh, we really need to change. Like, instantly it's rejection. It's like hiding. It wants to like throw a temper tantrum in order to be seen. But if you're like, no, you're okay, like that, like I would instantly relax, right? And it's that same thing that I think we need to give ourselves. And I wrote in my journal, and I'm putting together like a little like poetry book in terms of my experiences from everything I've gone through, is a little fun fact that not everyone knows.
Cool.
From the writings. And one thing I remember writing is, what if I don't want to be healed? What if I want to be loved? And it's that idea. Sometimes healing feels as though something's wrong with us, when what if it's just love that we need at the end of the day? And that is like a balm to every single like or stingy part within myself.
I see that in my clients too, right? Like, I could just the fact of them feeling safe with me, or safe in the group of women, that is the healing, right? I could teach them nothing. And just having the connection of someone to see you in a vulnerable moment, or to reinforce like that your voice matters. The healing is so much of just feeling accepted and loved. And in like, the midst
of all your crap that's coming up, right? Like, they're seeing, I'm sure within the group and with you, like they're showing their most like unlovable parts, the things that they carry the most shame around, that they think was the part that was berated as a kid. And if you still stay and you're still like, it's okay, it doesn't flummox you, they don't run away, they're still loved. Like that, I think more and more people need to realize, like, healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens with the experience and the actual relationship. And so it doesn't have to come from a man right away. Find a coach or a therapist, or honestly, like, I have wonderful friendships in my life that has taught me love. It made me feel safe to show myself and be vulnerable with people, and actually experience what it feels like to be seen and to show myself and to still be loved. Means now, okay, I can bring that to a man today.
It never ceases. In every group that I have held, one woman makes the courageous act to say the vulnerable thing. And then it's like a cascading effect of all of this opening and all of this releasing and all of this permission to be seen and to have space held for you. Because that's the other thing that we as women, we're the space holders. And I work with a lot of therapists, a lot of like people who hold space for other people, and they come into the group and they're like, hold me, like, like just like, so like, little girl, like, I'm tired.
And of course we're tired and exhausted from caregiving and nurturing and loving other people. Like, you deserve and need that too. Of course, that makes so much sense. So like, find those places is what other thing I would say for these women is it exists, whether it's within a partnership, but like sisterhood and friendships is one of the most, like, gives me like unbounding energy when I think of it in terms of some of the women that I'm connected with in my life right now. Like I would not be who I am without those connections.
Yeah.
And so we are showing the way and it's possible. So seek that out if you can with other women. Yeah.
Oh my God. I feel like I talked to you for like 7 hours, but we should probably wrap up. Thank you for your wisdom and your insight. I love to end these by pulling a spirit oracle card. And on behalf of all the listeners, I would love if you could tune in with me to the deck. So if it feels okay to close your eyes and just maybe place your energy or your attention on the deck. And I'm starting to shuffle. So whenever it feels right for me to stop, just tell me to stop.
Now.
Okay. Slow.
Ooh.
You see that?
Yeah, the little time. I forget what those are called right now. Hourglasses?
Hourglass. Yeah. Yes. Hourglass. Yeah. I'm going to read the message because this is a new deck and I love it and don't know it all yet.
Yeah. What? You haven't memorized all the cards?
Yeah. Slow reminds you that you have all the time you need. Not all the time in the world, but all the time you need. Take a breath, pause, assess. Soak in the tiny, meaningful moments in your life. You are missing so much. Shift your pace. Stop fretting. Quit rushing. Take a breath. Touch your heart as your breath calms your system. Invite reflection on the things you have been trying to outrun. You'll never move fast enough anyway. Slow down without fear, knowing that you have all the time you need.
I love that.
I love that so much. The invite reflection on the things you've been trying to outrun. You'll never move fast enough anyway.
Yeah. That's an uncomfortable truth, but very true. Yeah. And also like that first line too, where it says, like you have all the time you need or something like that. Like not what. Yeah. Is that
you have all the time you need, not all the time in the world, but all the time you need.
And that gives such solace, I think, right? Because we live in a capitalist, patriarchal world that, is the reality currently in terms of what we live in. I think it's important to recognize. So there's still those urges within myself to be like, I need to get there,
Well,
hurry to the next thing.
And the slowness of, we're talking about balancing the feminine, right? If you're in more of that masculine drive and the masculine, like, go, push, do, achieve, success, like fight, kill, whatever, like
the gladiator war chants.
Yeah. How can we bring in permission to be slow, whether that's like stopping for a 30-minute walk in the middle of your day when everything else is like pushing you to like your to-do list is 75 miles long. Like,
it is.
Not speaking from experience.
Just a third party opinion.
Yeah. That permission to have both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I just think we so often rush the journey, right? And I know we've all heard it before in terms of it's the journey, not the destination and blah, blah, blah. But really is like, I even this idea of if we go traveling, we bemoan kind of the plane ride to get to that place, right? That's kind of part of the experience and the fun of going somewhere. If we were to shift that perspective on it, like if you were to teleport somewhere, that's something like I've thought of a superpower I would want to have. But then where would we stop? If we had the power to teleport to anywhere or to any future, where is that desired place that we're trying to get to? So there is no rush, and all we really have is this moment here.
Yeah, that's an uncomfortable truth too.
Yeah, and to sink into the depth of each moment versus the wideness of it is something that I always try and seek more and more. So thank you for that card. Perfect to hear. It's a Friday as we record this. So perfect to hear before I head into the weekend.
Yeah. And permission to take the rest of the day off.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, clients, you're not getting any more work for me.
Yeah. Oh, Deanne, it was such a pleasure. This has been amazing. thank you for your vulnerability. Speaking of so much vulnerability that we've talked about, and just being the example, right? We infect people with the drive to want to better themselves by living our life in alignment with how we've bettered ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have to be us preaching from the top of the soapbox, and it shouldn't, right? It's like, again, even with what we're talking about, like, I'm up here, you can meet me if you're also up here. It's like, how can we just show up that way in all ways of life?
Yeah.
And it feels very much like you're moving about in a very conscious, intentional, awake state most of the time, right? I'm sure we all have moments of
say I'm not flawless, and sometimes I'm up here and sometimes I'm in the trenches too. So it's never that, if you're listening to this and feel alone, like, I just want you to know you're never alone in terms of what you're going through. But I think if we share more and more about this and hold ourselves and other people to what's possible, and just, becoming aware of what's potentially on the other side of some of the questions we may ask. What else would life be if we didn't ask some of these questions?
No. Yep. I love it so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Bree, and such wonderful questions, and sharing you too in terms of this conversation and all that you do. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be able to dive in with women in conversations and coaching, and I don't know, the value that I get to live out on a day-to-day basis is pretty special. Yeah. Oh, thank you, Deanne. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.